In a world full of mysteries and thrilling stories, the case of Frank Fritz and the dramatic death of Mike Wolfe has become one of the most shocking tales. The images of the two close friends, who together built a famous television empire through the show American Pickers, have been deeply etched into the minds of viewers. However, when the secrets behind Frank's disappearance and Mike's sudden death began to unravel, everything we thought we knew about friendship, loyalty, and fame suddenly fell apart. This case isn't just an investigation into a man's death. It's the story of the fall of a legend and the dark shadows that fame, money, and power can cast. If you want to keep uncovering the untold mysteries and dive deeper into the truth behind this case, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and hit the notification bell so you won't miss any updates. This story is far from over. In fact, it might just be the beginning of a nightmare-filled journey. Join us as we continue to peel back the layers of this mystery, because sometimes the truth is more terrifying than anything we could imagine. But the deeper the investigation went, the more unusual the details became. The medical records didn't match the evidence found at the scene. Some accounts revealed that Frank wasn't just worried about his health. He was living in fear. He had once confided in a friend that he felt like he was being watched. On another occasion, he spoke about people trying to silence him. At first, everyone assumed it was just a symptom of chronic depression and anxiety. But after the autopsy revealed traces of poison in his bloodstream, everything changed. Mike Wolfe, who initially appeared heartbroken over Frank's death, showed up in the media looking shocked and choked up. But sharp-eyed investigators began to notice inconsistencies. His statements didn't add up, the timeline was off, and there were strange financial transactions that raised red flags. A series of clues started falling into place like pieces of a chilling jigsaw puzzle. An unusual money transfer, a disabled security camera on the night Frank was found unconscious, and a strange DNA sample discovered in the victim's home. Police began digging deeper into the true nature of the relationship between the two men. Although they were close friends and co-stars on television, behind the scenes, things were very different. Off-camera, there were arguments and irreconcilable differences. Frank felt abandoned, replaced, and increasingly suspicious of Mike's loyalty. Mike, on the other hand, faced the looming possibility of Frank returning and reclaiming his old position. The trial dragged on for weeks, filled with chilling evidence and shocking testimonies from those who had known both men. And finally, the verdict was delivered. But before justice could be fully served, Mike Wolfe, the once iconic figure, fell from grace, taking all of his unfinished secrets to the grave. The question still lingers. Was this truly the end? Or just the tip of the iceberg in the world of television, where friendship, fame, and betrayal dangerously intertwine? When news of Frank's sudden death at home broke, the public was shocked and deeply saddened. Tributes poured in across social media. Frank was remembered as the heart of the show, a rough-around-the-edges yet lovable man, the perfect contrast to Mike Wolfe's smooth and charming demeanor. But just 6 weeks after the funeral, a quiet investigation began in Iowa. It started with a small question. An observant medical examiner noticed something off, a discrepancy in the autopsy report. Frank had a lethal level of fentanyl in his system. At first glance, it didn't seem unusual. Fentanyl is a powerful painkiller, sometimes prescribed for severe pain following a stroke. But there was one problem. Frank had no prescription, no history of use, and according to those closest to him, he was actually terrified of the drug. He had never touched it. There was no reason for that substance to be in his system, unless someone had put it there on purpose. Those suspicions couldn't be ignored. Local police contacted the DEA. The FBI launched an investigation. What was once considered a natural death quickly turned into a full-scale criminal case. They combed through phones, GPS records, deleted emails, text messages, and one name kept coming up: Mike Wolfe. To the public, Mike was a charming man, a creative entrepreneur who had turned antique hunting into an art form. But beneath the surface, he was a man obsessed with control, power, and, above all, absolute ownership of the show's legacy after Frank's departure. Mike not only kept his true motives hidden, but also began to make quiet, calculated moves. He filed a trademark for the name Frankiz just weeks after Frank's death. He secretly approached a third party to purchase Frank's shares in the company, as if the death were an opportunity to take over the entire brand. And then came the undeniable evidence. A neighbor's doorbell camera captured footage of Mike near Frank's home on the very night prosecutors believed the fatal dose of fentanyl was administered. No one wanted to believe it. How could it be Mike Wolfe, the man who had called Frank his brother for decades on screen? The seemingly inseparable partner. But evidence doesn't lie, and the mask of television charm couldn't hide a dark truth forever. And when the trial began, it was like a reality TV show no one could turn away from. A dark, suspenseful drama where the entire country watched every detail, every testimony, every lie stripped away to reveal a horrifying and painful truth. Mike Wolfe wasn't just accused of betraying Frank Fritz, the man he had once called his confidant, his partner on every journey, but he was also charged with coldly and deliberately poisoning his best friend to take all the fame, the legacy, and the entire brand they had built together. A life sentence hung over his head. Mike's sudden death came just as the justice system was closing in. The agency responsible for upholding the law and justice became a tragic end to one of the darkest chapters in reality TV history. But the story doesn't end there. Before the trial, before the death, there had been a friendship, a partnership built over time, through dusty journeys between crumbling barns and spider-webbed garages. So what shattered that seemingly unbreakable bond? What could have made Mike Wolfe, who once called Frank his brother, capable of such cruelty? To understand the root of this tragedy, we must rewind to where it all began, in the early days of American Pickers. The golden era of two like-minded friends with a shared passion and a desire to craft a truly American story in the early 2000s, when reality TV was still a new frontier, untainted by scripted dating shows or sensational dramas. Mike Wolfe had a vision that was unflashy, unpretentious, but very real and undeniable. He wasn't a producer, he wasn't an actor, and he didn't have the backing of a media empire. What he had was persistence, a keen eye for antiques, and an irresistible love for hunting down lost treasures. Mike had been a true scavenger since he was young. He wandered through small towns, knocking on doors, asking people if they had anything to sell. Sometimes it was real treasure, but more often than not, it was just junk, broken items, or things of little value. But that never stopped him. He envisioned a show that would capture the thrill of the treasure hunt, the excitement of negotiating for each item, the allure of uncovering forgotten treasures, and the deep connection between an object and its former owner. It wasn't just a show about antiques, it was a journey through memories. And then Frank Fritz came into the picture. Frank was the complete opposite of Mike in many ways. While Mike was outgoing, optimistic, charismatic, and full of energy, Frank was calmer, more reserved, and humble. He was a hands-on guy with a passion for vintage toys, old oil cans, and time-worn billboards. He wasn't concerned with flashy appearances, but was deeply fascinated by the intricate details hidden within. Real value in his eyes was often concealed, and that's what drew him in. They had known each other since high school, but life had taken them down different paths as they grew older. Mike pursued a full-time career as a picker, traveling across the U.S., while Frank spent many years as a firefighter and safety inspector before deciding to fully immerse himself in the world of antiques. When Mike began searching for a reliable partner to help him turn his dream into reality, Frank was the perfect choice. Not because they were alike, but because they complemented each other in a remarkable way. In 2009, after years of persistently pursuing the idea, Mike Wolfe finally received approval from the History Channel, and American Pickers was born. A show that seemed simple on the surface. Two men in a truck driving down the back roads of America, hunting for forgotten treasures. But the unique combination of Mike and Frank, along with their storytelling, turned the show into a phenomenon. Right from its first season, American Pickers attracted record-breaking viewership. Audiences were not only drawn to their love for antiques, but also to the natural chemistry between the two hosts. Mike's keen negotiating skills and sharp ability to uncover hidden value, combined with Frank's depth of knowledge and incredible expertise in collectibles, made the show feel more authentic and accessible than ever. But the most special thing about the show wasn't the items, it was the people. Each episode was an emotional journey, where viewers met elderly individuals who still cherished old memories, couples proudly talking about family heirlooms, and quirky collectors joyfully opening their private worlds. It was a place where memories were preserved in every nook and cranny of dusty barns and garages, filled with laughter, tears, and memories awakened after decades. American Pickers never ridiculed or mocked these people. On the contrary, the show offered them deep respect, and that became its unmistakable hallmark, touching the hearts of millions of viewers over the years. As American Pickers gained more popularity, the fame of the people behind the show exploded. Mike Wolfe and Frank Fritz quickly became household names, appearing everywhere from large events to crowded autograph signings. Their fame turned Mike's antique stores in Iowa and Nashville into pilgrimage destinations for fans of the show. But, as is often the case in the alluring world of reality TV, success comes at a cost. The once unbreakable partnership between Mike and Frank began to change as fame opened new doors, but also created gaps that were hard to bridge. Mike Wolfe gradually became the face of the brand. He grew more comfortable in front of the camera, appeared in more interviews, expanded his business ventures, and delved deeper into his personal brand. Behind the scenes, Mike took control. He became the executive producer, overseeing all brand-building deals, leading negotiations, and controlling much of the show's content. Gradually, the line between partner and boss began to blur. While Frank was still introduced as an equal partner on television, behind the scenes, things were no longer balanced. Those who worked closely with them revealed that the underlying conflicts had existed for years. Frank increasingly felt abandoned, his ideas no longer heard, his contributions overlooked, and his sense of being undervalued grew stronger. According to former crew members, Mike began to act as though the show was his personal property rather than a collective effort of the entire team. The imbalance was not just an issue of ego, but a power structure. Mike owned the antiques business, Mike controlled the production company, and Mike had the final say on creative decisions. Wolfe's partners wrote that once this burden was resolved, they could clearly expand without delay and without looking back. Another email presented to the court revealed plans for launching a new independent brand called Mike Wolfe, with the launch date set just 3 weeks after Frank's death. These details left the jury with no doubt about the true motives behind Wolfe's actions. Notably, the location data also showed that Wolfe's custom black Mercedes Sprinter van was near Frank's house from 1:36 a.m. to 1:46 a.m. on the night of the incident, just a 10-minute window. The prosecution argued that when Wolfe administered the lethal dose to Frank, the emotional tension had reached a boiling point. When the prosecution called Frank's sister, Mary Ann Fritz, to the stand, her voice was soft yet firm as she described how Frank had fallen apart after being cut from the show. Not only did his physical health deteriorate, but his mental health was also in crisis. He would often tell her that Mike didn't care, that his longtime partner just wanted him to disappear from his life. The next shock came when the defense presented a handwritten letter found on Frank's desk, in which Frank expressed his fear that Mike was following him, and that if anything happened, it wouldn't be an accident. The testimony of the next witness, Elaine Temple, truly silenced the courtroom. Frank's neighbor took the stand, visibly tense. She said that she couldn't sleep on the night of the incident when she looked out the window and saw a van she recognized from a television show. A man stepped out and silently walked to the side door of Frank's house. He didn't knock, but stood there for a moment before walking around to the back of the house. When shown a lineup photo, Elaine pointed to Mike Wolfe and said she believed it was him, although she wasn't certain. The man moved with the same posture and demeanor she had seen countless times on screen. The defense tried to discredit Elaine's testimony by questioning the lighting conditions that night and the reliability of her memory, but the damage had been done. The pieces were slowly falling into place, painting a grim and chilling picture. The most emotional moment for the defense came when Mike Wolfe took the stand. His attorney acknowledged that it was a risky decision, but Mike was determined to go through with it. He slowly walked up to the witness stand, no longer the confident TV host that America once knew. His voice trembled at first, but he regained his composure. "We were like brothers," he said. Mike said, "We built something special together, but things got complicated. Fame changes people, and money distorts relationships. I may not have handled things well, but I never intended to hurt Frank." He explained that the messages found on his personal phone were sent when he was angry, and the work pressure caused him to lose control. "I said things I regret, but that doesn't mean I killed him. I miss Frank every day. We fought, but I swear I would never hurt him." "I couldn't live with myself if I did that." But those defenses didn't change the jury's mind. The evidence against Mike Wolfe was too strong, too consistent. After weeks of arguments in a stifling courtroom where time seemed to stand still, all eyes were on Mike Wolfe, the man who was once a national TV icon, now standing motionless like a statue, the cold light casting shadows on his pale face. And then, the deep, authoritative voice of the judge broke the tension in the courtroom. "The defendant, Michael Wolfe, is found guilty." A gasp filled the room like a cold wind running down the spines of all the witnesses, All eyes remained on Mike Wolfe, waiting for a reaction, any sign of regret or anger. But he stood motionless, his eyes hollow, staring unblinking. Then, in what felt like an eternity, he blinked slowly and heavily, as if trying to process an unbearable truth. And then, he collapsed. A complete display of helplessness. His knees buckled, and his massive body fell to the cold stone floor before anyone could react. The first horrified scream rang out as Mike Wolfe lay motionless, his arms outstretched, his face down, his graying hair disheveled. For the briefest moment, the courtroom froze, as if time itself had stopped. Then chaos erupted, the screech of chairs scraping, the heavy thud of footsteps, panic flooding the air. The medical team rushed in, kneeling beside him, starting chest compressions, doing everything they could to save the man just convicted. An oxygen mask was hastily placed over his pale face. Worried questions echoed. "Where's the pulse? What's the blood pressure? Call an ambulance." But amidst the chaos, a grim truth began to emerge. The man once seen as a symbol of uncovering and reviving forgotten treasures, who had built a television empire from piles of old junk, was now nothing more than a tragic relic, a living testament to the collapse brought on by greed and ruthlessness. Mike Wolfe died in the courtroom. Just as the verdict was read, news of his sudden and dramatic death spread like wildfire, leaving the world in shock. How could a story that had once been seen as a sensational rumor turn into such a cruel and tragic reality? How could a beloved television show end in such betrayal and a haunting death? Mike's death was not just the end of a person, but the collapse of the entire image of a beloved icon in the hearts of viewers. Mike became a tragic testament to the horrific price of fame, money, and power. When pushed to the limits, the Frank Fritz case felt like a punch to the collective trust of the global public, as the perpetrator was not a stranger, but the victim's close friend, someone who had traveled together with him and called each other brothers. Mike's sudden death at the very place where justice was to be served left a heavy echo and countless unanswered questions. He fell just as the truth was revealed, as if the verdict was the final blow in that moment. Time seemed to stand still. The man who once symbolized the journey of seeking forgotten treasures had now become a monument to blind ambition and the wrong choices he had made. But is that the end? Or are there still secrets behind closed doors, dark corners yet to be illuminated? The truth could be more shocking than anything we've ever known. If you want to continue exploring the remaining mysteries of the Frank Fritz case and dive deeper into the truth behind Mike Wolfe's death, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell, because sometimes the truth is not just the end, but the beginning of another nightmare. If you feel there are still many unanswered questions in this story, join us as we continue the journey to uncover the truth. Every detail could change the entire picture and open up hidden corners we never knew existed. Like the video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell to stay updated with the latest information on this case. The story isn't over, and every new discovery could change the way you view what really happened. Loyal viewers began to notice a distinct change. Frank seemed more withdrawn, his screen time decreased, he was absent from promotional campaigns, and he rarely appeared in interviews. Rumors started to circulate, with some speculating that Frank was dealing with health issues, while others spoke of internal tensions. The show never officially addressed the issue, but social media couldn't stop reporting on it. Then the news was confirmed. Frank would not be returning. The official reason was that he needed time to recover from back surgery, a vague statement made to avoid any specific commitments. But what shocked fans wasn't the departure itself, but Mike's reaction. While many expected a heartfelt tribute to his companion of over a decade, what they got was a brief post on Instagram, cold and distant. "Wishing you all the best," as if Frank were just another replaceable cog in a running machine. And so, the show continued without Frank. A new co-host was introduced. Viewership declined, but the antique archaeology brand kept growing. Merchandise still sold well, and Mike Wolfe continued to appear in interviews as if nothing had changed. Meanwhile, Frank Fritz vanished from the public eye. But behind the scenes, the truth was far from peaceful. Frank struggled in the shadows. According to close friends, he felt not only abandoned by the show, but also by Mike, the friend he had been so closely connected with for years. Frank believed he deserved better. In his mind, he was not just the co-host, but also a co-founder, a soul who had been deeply intertwined with American Pickers from the very beginning. He had helped build a loyal fan base and brought his personality to the show. And now, he had been quietly and bitterly discarded. The shock sent Frank into a downward spiral. He began drinking again, stopped attending public events, gained weight, and became increasingly depressed. His depression escalated, and eventually he suffered a stroke. This marked the beginning of his tragic downfall. What really happened between Frank and Mike remains a mystery. Some people say that egos were the cause of the fallout, while others blame money. Some believe there was a deeper betrayal that the audience never saw on screen. But regardless of the cause, the friendship that once formed the foundation of American Pickers completely collapsed. Frank's death should have been a wake-up call, a moment of gratitude and remembrance. Instead, Mike Wolfe's actions, or rather his silence, shocked the public. He didn't attend the funeral, didn't post a tribute, nor did he share any emotional notes in the days following his old friend's death. It was all just a strange calm in the storm of suspicion. What the public didn't know was that behind the scenes, a quiet investigation was underway. Reports of toxins showed that Frank had a lethal dose of fentanyl in his system, a dangerous drug, and he didn't have a valid prescription. Questions began to arise. Who had given Frank the drugs? Who stood to benefit from his death? And what was Mike Wolfe doing near Frank's house the night before he was found unconscious? Fame can be very seductive, but it can also be a double-edged sword. For Mike and Frank, it was like an out-of-control roller coaster, loud, violent, and unstoppable. As American Pickers became a phenomenon and the business behind the show turned into a massive cash-generating industry, everything started to change. The simplicity that once defined the show began to fade. No longer was it thrilling to find a vintage motorcycle from the 1930s under a dusty tarp in rural Tennessee. The excitement of discovering an old oil sign in a dilapidated barn was no longer there. Everything now revolved around profit deals, licensing agreements, and the power behind the scenes. And in that world of calculation, Mike Wolfe emerged as a powerful entrepreneur, while Frank, once his close companion, became a shadow of himself, slowly swept away by the whirlwind he had helped create. Mike Wolfe quietly solidified his power. He hired a team of agents, lawyers, and public relations consultants. Step by step, Mike began trademarking exclusive phrases related to the American Pickers brand and the antiques field. He expanded his empire into numerous side projects, from merchandise to media rights, creating a tightly knit network of brands functioning like a corporation. Meanwhile, Frank Fritz had a completely different dream. He just wanted a simple life, to be on TV, chat with fans, and enjoy the thrill of discovering soulful antiques. Two of Frank's close friends reported that since season 6, the tone between him and Mike had changed significantly. A crew member recalled an incident in Alabama during season 8. The crew had gone to film at an antique car lot owned by a Korean War veteran. Frank had connected with the elderly man in a heartfelt and moving conversation about his passion for collecting memorabilia from the gas station. It was a rare, warm, and emotional moment on TV. But when the episode aired, the entire footage was ruthlessly cut. Instead, there were scenes of Mike negotiating prices and emphasizing the resale potential of the antiques. Frank was furious. He felt erased from the story, erased from his own moment. And according to insiders, Frank wasn't the only one who felt this way. Other crew members, from shop owners to experts to pickers, had seen their scenes cut, unless they served to boost Mike Wolfe's image. Over time, Mike seemed to want to become the hero of every episode. The control seeped into every corner of the American Pickers brand, from the scripts to social media. Mike even copyrighted the phrases commonly used on the show, ensuring that all revenue from merchandise would flow into his LLC. The official social media accounts were no longer controlled by the network, but were managed by Mike's own team. He hired personal advisors to craft his public image. Any interview had to be cleared by his representatives first. A former executive who worked during the early seasons revealed that Mike knew how to turn his fame into a weapon. He knew the network needed him, and wasn't afraid to threaten to leave if things didn't go his way. And the truth was, things always went his way. The press kept smiling, but behind closed doors, Mike was a bulldozer. Frank witnessed it all. He began to show his frustration during filming. At times, he would walk off in the middle of heated arguments. There were occasions when he refused to promote new episodes because he wasn't happy with how he was portrayed. Frank believed Mike was being marketed as the only star, while he, who had helped build the show, was being demoted to a supporting role. The production team quickly noticed the disappearance of the spontaneous laughter between Mike and Frank. Moments that once symbolized true friendship and camaraderie were now replaced with forced interactions, scripted in front of the camera. The two rarely spoke unless it was absolutely necessary. The truck, once filled with laughter and small-town stories, had now become a silent ride. Frank often drove alone while Mike was busy building his personal empire. Mike purchased properties in Tennessee and Iowa to expand his old-school archaeological digs and turn them into tourist attractions. Fans lined up for hours just to catch a glimpse of his office or take pictures with his iconic truck. Merchandise flew off the shelves, from t-shirts, mugs, and posters to signed crowbars. As the seasons went on, Mike Wolfe became more than just the host of the show. He became a brand. He started taking on solo projects. According to a former network executive, there were even internal discussions about giving Mike an entirely new show without Frank. When asked about the rumors, Wolfe publicly denied them, but the seeds of doubt had already been planted. What hurt Frank the most, according to multiple sources, was not just the fame discrepancy, but Mike's silence. Mike quietly made decisions without Frank. He changed the scripts without his approval, scheduled meetings without prior notice. All of this made Frank feel increasingly invisible. It was a painful feeling that his voice no longer mattered. The show had once been a shared vision, but now there was only one leader. Then came the health issues. Years of constant travel and an unhealthy lifestyle had taken a toll on Frank's physical health. He was diagnosed with Crohn's disease, a chronic inflammatory bowel condition that made it difficult for him to move around. He also began experiencing severe back pain and had to undergo surgery. When Frank stepped back from filming, everyone thought it was just temporary, that he would recover and return. But that never happened. The official statement from the network only said that Frank was on medical leave. Fans sent him thousands of well wishes, and rumors of his return appeared every few weeks.
But the silence continued. Behind the scenes, Frank didn't receive a single call. His name was rarely mentioned in meetings. When he reached out to the producers, he received vague, evasive responses. Then one day, the decision was made. He was gone. Frank's name disappeared from promotional materials, his face replaced by a new co-host. The show went on, and he was left behind, surrounded by the wreckage of a friendship that once seemed inseparable. Months later, Frank broke his silence in an emotional interview. He confessed that he and Mike hadn't spoken in 2 years. During his recovery, what hurt him the most wasn't the physical pain, but the cold indifference from his friend. Frank said, "I didn't leave the show. They left me." That simple yet painful statement sent shockwaves through the fan community. How could a duo that was once inseparable, two men who brought American pickers into the hearts of viewers for over a decade, part ways in such a cold, detached manner? And why has Mike Wolfe never publicly addressed the mysterious departure of Frank Fritz? After leaving the show, Frank's condition worsened. He fell into a deep depression, feeling betrayed and forgotten by those he once called friends. He gradually isolated himself, stopped responding to messages, and rarely left his home. His weight fluctuated, his health deteriorated, and then, suddenly, he suffered a stroke. Frank was found unconscious in his home in Davenport, Iowa, by a neighbor who hadn't seen him in several days. He was rushed straight to the ICU, initially in critical condition. It was initially seen as a tragic story, a middle-aged man worn out after years of struggling with illness, stress, and loneliness. But then the truth began to surface. The initial toxicology report from the hospital revealed a shocking detail. Frank tested positive for fentanyl, not just a trace, but a lethal dose. This drug can stop a person's breathing, paralyze the nervous system, and kill them within minutes. But Frank had never been known to use street drugs. He had been living in isolation during his recovery, keeping away from public attention. So how did fentanyl enter his body? That question remained unanswered until after Frank's death. That's when the coroner's office conducted a full autopsy. Blood samples and toxicology reports were reanalyzed, ensuring nothing was overlooked. The final conclusion was deafening. Frank had been exposed to a synthetic form of fentanyl, 40 times stronger than heroin. It wasn't prescribed, it wasn't in any of his medical records, and it certainly wasn't self-administered. It had been injected into his body. Frank's family and friends maintained that he had always been terrified of needles. Even a flu shot would make him anxious. He only took medication when absolutely necessary and never touched anything that required an injection. Therefore, the idea that Frank would have injected himself with a lethal dose of opioids was unthinkable to those who loved him. Then came the chilling detail about a small, almost invisible wound on Frank's upper thigh, barely noticeable until he removed his clothes. From that point on, it was no longer an accident. This was a murder. After a thorough investigation of Frank's home, Mike Wolfe was quietly arrested, keeping away from the media as he faced charges of first-degree murder and attempted evidence tampering. The face once beloved across the United States now appeared weary and pained. The smile that had once been so familiar had vanished, replaced by deeper wrinkles around his eyes, and his gaze was filled with loss. Mike vehemently denied all accusations. In the first trial, he pleaded not guilty, claiming the evidence was merely circumstantial, but the final verdict would be rendered in court, where the truth would be revealed without mercy. With Frank's death and the truth about fentanyl coming to light, a historic trial began, putting Mike Wolfe, once the face of a national television show, on trial. Prosecutors relied heavily on haunting evidence during the trial. They argued that Mike Wolfe's need for control was not just a habit, but had become an unhealthy obsession. Frank was no longer a trusted partner, but rather an obstacle, a thorn in his side preventing him from achieving his goal of fully dominating the empire he desperately wanted to own. A clinical psychologist, a witness called by the prosecution, provided a detailed analysis of Wolfe's behavior based on interviews and recorded testimony. He described Wolfe as exhibiting typical traits of narcissistic personality disorder: arrogance, lack of empathy, obsession with control, and a relentless desire to be admired at any cost. The courtroom went silent as a chilling recording of Mike's voice was played. In it, he described Frank as a burden during a private meeting. In an email to his business partner, Mike wrote, "When all of this is mine, we can finally scale without any obstacles." And it was clear to everyone that he was not talking about the show, but about Frank. The prosecution not only charged Wolfe with murder, but also framed the entire case as a business decision, a coldly calculated decision, the final step in a long series of actions aimed at removing anything that stood in the way of his dominance. The smile that had made him beloved by audiences across the country and earned him million-dollar contracts vanished in the courtroom. Mike Wolfe was stripped bare before the light of justice. Every private thought, every deliberate move, every ruthless ambition was brought to light. Detectives got involved just 3 weeks after Frank's death. Wolfe had quietly filed legal documents to control his image and signature. At the same time, a request was submitted through his lawyer to remove Frank from the ownership of the antique archaeology business, a move that only fueled further suspicion. Then came the autopsy report. A small, needle-like wound was found on Frank's upper thigh, a peculiar location that made suicide highly unlikely. Injected into his frail condition after a stroke, the fentanyl levels in his system were high enough to kill a person. More importantly, it proved that the dosage had been administered intentionally, not accidentally. As Mike Wolfe sat in silence in court, the evidence piled up. The truck, video footage, digital records, witness testimony, financial motive, the police investigation's conclusions, and above all, his own silence. No rebuttal, no emotion, no anger. Just a prolonged silence since Frank's death. The official charges were announced: first-degree murder, 2 counts of obstruction of justice, and 1 count of unlawfully using the digital identity of a deceased person. Mike Wolfe was held without bail. Through his attorney, Mike made his first statement. "These accusations are completely false. Mr. Wolfe loved Frank like a brother and is deeply saddened by his passing. He is fully cooperating with the investigation. We believe that when the entire picture is revealed, the truth will prevail. At the trial, the jury learned that in the final year before Frank's death, Mike Wolfe had begun strategic moves to gain full control over the American Pickers brand. He had quietly restructured his business entities, renegotiated contracts with the History Channel to remove Frank from the show, and filed for preferential control over revenue and distribution in the event that Frank was no longer involved. Wolfe's legal team argued that these were sound business decisions made after Frank faced health issues and left the show. However, an email dated 6 weeks before Frank's stroke painted a different picture in a letter sent to him. Wolfe's partners had written that once the burden was resolved, they could clearly expand without delay and without looking back. Another email presented in court revealed plans to launch a new independent brand named Mike Wolfe, with the launch date set just 3 weeks after Frank's death. These details left the jury with no doubts about the true motive behind Wolfe's actions. Notably, location data also showed that Wolfe's custom black Mercedes Sprinter van was near Frank's house from 1:36 a.m. to 1:46 a.m. on the night of the incident, a mere 10 minutes. The prosecution argued that when Wolfe injected Frank with a fatal dose of fentanyl, the emotional tension was at its peak. When the prosecution called Frank's sister, Mary Ann Fritz, to the stand, with a soft yet firm voice, she described how Frank had been devastated after being cut from the show. Not only had his physical health deteriorated, but his mental health had also been in crisis. He often told her that Mike didn't care, that his longtime companion just wanted him out of his life. The next shock came when the defense presented a handwritten letter found on Frank's desk, in which Frank expressed his fear that Mike was watching him, and that if anything happened, it would not be an accident. The testimony of the next witness, Elaine Temple, truly silenced the courtroom. Frank's neighbor took the stand with visible tension. She said she couldn't sleep the night of the incident, and when she looked out of her window, she saw a truck she recognized from a television show. A man stepped out and quietly walked to the side door of Frank's house. He didn't knock, just stood there for a moment before circling around to the back of the house. When shown a lineup photo, Elaine pointed to Mike Wolfe and said she believed it was him, although she wasn't entirely sure. The man moved with the same posture and demeanor she had seen many times on screen. The defense tried to discredit Elaine's testimony by questioning the lighting conditions that night and the reliability of her memory, but the damage had been done. The pieces were slowly falling into place, painting a chilling, grim picture. The most emotional moment for the defense came when Mike Wolfe took the stand. His attorney admitted it was a risky decision, but Mike was determined to go through with it. He slowly walked up to the witness stand, no longer the confident TV host that America once knew. His voice trembled at first, but he regained his composure. "We were like brothers," Mike said. "We built something special together, but things got complicated." Fame changes people, and money distorts relationships. I might not have handled things well, but I never intended to hurt Frank. He explained that the messages found on his personal phone were made when he was angry, the pressure of work causing him to lose control. "I said things I regret, but that doesn't mean I killed him. I miss Frank every day, we argued, but I swear I would never hurt him. I couldn't live with myself if I did." But these defenses did nothing to change the jury's perspective. The evidence against Mike Wolfe was too strong, too consistent. After weeks of arguments in a suffocating courtroom where time seemed to stand still, all eyes were on Mike Wolfe, the man who had once been a national television icon now standing motionless like a statue, cold light casting over his pale face. Then the deep, authoritative voice of the judge broke the tension in the courtroom. The defendant, Michael Wolfe, is found guilty. A collective gasp filled the room like a cold wind running down the spines of all the witnesses. Every eye remained fixed on Mike Wolfe, waiting for a reaction, any sign of regret or anger. But he remained still, his eyes empty, staring unblinkingly. Then, in what seemed like an eternity, he blinked slowly and heavily, as if struggling to process an unbearable truth. And then, he collapsed. A display of complete helplessness. His knees buckled, and his massive body crumpled to the cold stone floor before anyone could react. The first horrified scream echoed through the courtroom as Mike Wolfe lay motionless, his arms stretched out, his face down, his graying hair disheveled. In that first moment, the courtroom froze as if time had stopped. Then chaos erupted. The screech of chairs, heavy footsteps, and panicked sounds filled the air. The medical team rushed in, kneeling beside him, beginning chest compressions, doing everything they could to save the man who had just been convicted. An oxygen mask was hurriedly placed over his pale face. Worried questions rang out. "Where's the pulse? What's the blood pressure? Call an ambulance." But amid the chaos, a brutal truth slowly emerged. The man who had once symbolized the discovery and revival of forgotten treasures, the one who had built a television empire from piles of old junk, was now nothing more than a tragic relic, a living testament to the collapse brought on by greed and ruthlessness. Mike Wolfe died in the courtroom. Just as the verdict was announced, news of his sudden and dramatic death spread like wildfire, leaving the world in shock. How could a story once considered nothing more than a sensational rumor become such a brutal reality? How could a beloved television show end in betrayal and a haunting death like this? Mike's death was not just the end of a man, but the collapse of the entire image of a cherished icon in the hearts of viewers. Mike became a tragic testament to the terrible price of fame, money, and power. When pushed to the limit, the case of Frank Fritz felt like a punch to the global public's trust, with the perpetrator not being a stranger, but the victim's best friend, a man who had been through it all with him, who had called him a brother. The sudden death of Mike at the very place where justice was served left a heavy echo and countless unanswered questions. He collapsed just as the truth was revealed, as if the verdict was the final blow to the moment. Time seemed to stand still. The man who once symbolized the journey to uncover forgotten treasures had now become a relic of blind ambition and his own misguided choices. In the end, the story of Frank Fritz and Mike Wolfe is not just a tragedy of a broken friendship, but also a lesson in ambition, betrayal, and the cost of fame. Behind every glamorous story on screen are hidden corners the public never sees. And sometimes, the truth is even more painful than we could ever imagine. Mike Wolfe, once the iconic figure of a beloved television show, has now become a symbol of the downfall caused by blind ambition and misguided choices. His death, occurring just as the truth came to light, not only marked the end of a life, but also closed a chapter in a long story cherished by millions. Though the truth may be harsh, we cannot forget what happened or the valuable lessons it left behind. Sometimes the truth isn't just an ending, it's a beginning. A beginning for new stories, new discoveries, and questions that may never have complete answers. Thank you for following this journey with us, and always remember, sometimes what we know is only the tip of the iceberg.